Hello, I'm Paul Quigley. I'm joined by Benedict Nicholson of the NewsWhip Research Centre. Welcome to the NewsWhip Pulse. We've got a action-packed show for you this week. As the head of the NewsWhip Research Centre, Ben is deep in our data all the time and is able to go quite deep into some of the big major news trends that are happening. And we're going to focus today on three that really encapsulate the interplay between media and news and social media. That is the GameStop Robinhood phenomenon, vaccination and engagement with vaccination content so far this year. And of course, for many people who are tuning in, the Super Bowl is going to be of interest. So we're going to look at that as well. And also use our new compare feature to compare with previous Super Bowls, which provides some very intriguing results. Danielle, our show's producer, is just introducing herself in the chat. Drop some questions there. She'll triage them, and perhaps we can address them as they come up during our chat as well. Yeah, let's, without further ado, the motto is speed to insight, so we got to go and get to the insights. So let's start with the vaccines, Ben. So at the end of last year, the vaccines, the approvals began for vaccines in the UK, the US, Israel. It's extended into Europe, and a major area of public health concern is fear of the vaccines, hesitancy about the vaccines, and of course misinformation about the vaccines. So
Yeah,
we'll be
that's
very
right.
interested to see what are people sharing and engaging with out there.
Yeah, it's definitely a very important topic. It's probably one of the most important topics in the world right now. I just want to highlight we're going to do things a little differently in this pulse. Normally we would bring up a slideshow, but we're going to try an experiment of showing the product to illustrate some of the things that we're talking about. So I'm going to share my screen and talk through some of these trends that we're seeing. So this is vaccines, and this is a search for vaccines, COVID vaccine, and all of the named vaccines. So the major ones that people have probably heard of, which would be Pfizer, AstraZeneca, Moderna, and then some of the less known ones as well are also captured within this, but they wouldn't necessarily come up in a search. So the Russian vaccines, the Chinese vaccines that are being worked on as well, those would all be encompassed here. It's just they're less likely to appear as highly engaged news items in the West. This is an English language search only, so that's maybe why some of that bias comes in, but just so everyone knows what exactly we're looking at. And then I think the easiest way to approach this is just to kind of go left to right as we look at it. So this is just a dashboard of public and media interest over time. So what that means is media articles published about each vaccine. Sorry, clicked into that by mistake. Problems of doing it live. The number of articles published per day that fit these search parameters, and then the public engagement with those search parameters as well. So we can look and see that while this loads in the public engagement, we can see that, about 21,000 articles per day. It's a pretty solid baseline of how many articles are being written, 20,000 plus, apart from at the weekends, interestingly, which is when media output drops off a cliff, but public engagement doesn't. So up here we can see the public engagement to those articles that are being published. And this is the likes, shares, comments on social media that those articles being shared generate. And what's interesting here is mostly that it's pretty solid. Like normally we see a lot of peaks and troughs, so we see a massive spike and then a fall away with stuff that's, maybe interesting for a week, or we'll see later with the Super Bowl and GameStop that it really generated a massive amount of interest for 3, 4, 5 days, and then after that fell away. But that's not the case with vaccines. These are really capturing the public's interest all the time, millions of engagements every day, 3, 4, 5 million engagements just consistently since the beginning of the year.
That's like, if I can come in there for a moment, Ben, like that's very interesting as well, because when you look at the COVID spike, even back in March 2020, when it became the most engaged with news event probably in the history of the social web, it was pretty spiky as well. Like this ongoing interest and is quite unusual. It's like something you'd expect for a perennial topic like Trump was last year or something, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's people not getting sick of it. And I think a facet of that is that different things are going viral as well on different days. So we can look at some of the articles that are going viral. There are a variety. Perhaps the most interesting and the most worrying facet of this is the things like this top article that we can see here, which it's not misinformation in the way that we normally think about misinformation. It's much more on the audience side. Like, this is a perfectly accurate article that is being shared in a way that is maybe disingenuous. So it's a healthy doctor died 2 weeks after getting a COVID-19 vaccine. CDC is investigating why. A little bit of a sensational headline. The article itself is very balanced. It says, like, nobody knows whether there's any link between the two, etc. There's no proof there's any link, all of that, all of the caveats that you would expect from a piece of good news reporting. But the problem is the headline is being shared either out of context or in a way that confirms people's priors. That is like, I should worry about getting the vaccine. A healthy person died after getting the vaccine. And this isn't in a misinformation site. This is in the Chicago Tribune, which is, a 150-year-old newspaper that is, I think, pretty widely seen as a legitimate news source. And we've seen this happen before. I'm sure you remember, Paul, when some QAnon stuff reporting in the AP that was just about protecting children, funding for protecting children, went viral in QAnon communities. The same thing might be happening here, where people are taking news out of context. Yeah.
Like, a major phenomenon is when your priors, as you say, Ben, and that's like this phrase that people in maybe the rationalist community use, right? Like, your prior assumptions frame things, and then you're just looking for you're really looking for facts that confirm expectations. And certainly we've seen a whole almost category of stories where health complications being reported by very legitimate publications post-vaccination are probably the most shared category of vaccine content. Is that fair to say?
Exactly, yeah. And if not the most shared, then the most highly engaged, or if not the most often shared, then the most highly engaged of those. So we actually did a thing where we looked at the top 100 stories on the blog and categorized them by their categories. And there were a lot of ones that were like this. And what's interesting is they often come in local news. So we can see here the OC Register, which is just a local California publication out of Orange County, I think. That has 750,000 plus engagements on news of a healthcare worker dying after receiving the second dose of the COVID vaccine there. So people trust local news outlets. So this is kind of a way to say, a way people can share things disingenuously and say, look, this local news outlet is saying this, you trust your local news outlet, you should be aware of this. And that's a real problem with vaccine hesitancy that we see. Like, the more these narratives go unchecked, the more likely it is that we see vaccine hesitancy, given the high amount of vaccine proliferation we're going to need to see to get to any kind of herd immunity. Like, this is all potentially damaging to that, but not in a traditional misinformation way that we would normally think about.
Yeah, and it's a real bind, because from a platform perspective, this is not misinformation. This is accurately reported news. For news organizations, they're going to want to report newsworthy items like these, and presumably, these are newsworthy. And for people, maybe there's some disingenuous sharing. There's probably a lot of hesitancy leading to this sharing. But you can see there's a real bind here for media, for the platforms. Unlike with coordinated misinformation or coordinated kind of bot activity, which Facebook can just take down, or actual misinformation, which they can flag, take down, boot off InfoWars or whatever. So it's
and Facebook are taking action. They suspended Robert Kennedy Jr.'s account for vaccine misinformation in the past week, and they have committed to taking down COVID misinformation as well. But then this again hits that gray area, as you say, of it makes it really difficult for any kind of moderation, because nothing's false. It's just there's no proven link. And then, I just quickly to reference the other types of stories that go viral. We've seen a lot of stuff about vaccines getting delivered to remote areas. So especially like like this story here, getting COVID-19 vaccine to Western Central Africa. We see it there. We see it in places like Alaska as well. So people getting really encouraged by the fact that the vaccine isn't just going to major cities, but it's also going to places that need it, as well as, just the cities that we're obviously all aware of. And then the other thing that people are looking at is what life will be like after the vaccine, and especially in terms of the precautions that they'll need to take. So it's interesting that people are almost taking it as a given that the vaccine's coming, it's going to work, but what do I need to do even once I have the vaccine, in terms of like, do I need to wear a mask? Will schools be open? Do I need a vaccine passport? All that kind of stuff. So I think, it's interesting to see kind of people's mindset around this. And I think that offers some evidence into that. And I think, just to quickly go back to the misinformation, it's important that people are aware that this is out there, because then it can be countered. I mean, that's not something that flags up. For example, if you look just at the Facebook pages that are going viral as we move from left to right here, there's a lot of great stuff in here. UNICEF, lots of UNICEF posts and World Health Organization posts that the Facebook is actually promoting and encouraging. But if you're just looking at what pages go viral on Facebook, you wouldn't necessarily know about this other stuff that's being shared. So it's really important to take a cross-platform view there.
Very good. So that's very interesting on like the Facebook posts and the articles. The next column here will be the websites that are creating the articles are getting the most engagement across the web, right? So this is an important factor to see the quality of those sources, and we can infer from that the quality of what people are engaging with.
Precisely, yeah. And so, I mean, really, this is very encouraging. It's like a who's who of legitimate news sites. This just looks at the last month or so, which is why the Chicago Tribune article isn't included in there, because that was from January 7th. This measures back to January 13th. But we have, the New York Times, NBC News, CNN, NPR, Washington Post, etc. And, much the same in, as we look at the top authors, Catherine Wu from The Atlantic, Kanye Whitworth, Terry Swartzer, NBC, all over the place, AL.com, local news sites. Just very encouraging when we look at that aspect of it, especially as, this article from the Chicago Tribune was shared on January 7th. We haven't seen a huge proliferation of that sort of thing since then. That's the most salient example. It's not like it's been a continuous wave of these things, which is also good because it means there's not much reporting of that kind that's happening. Like, people aren't necessarily dying after or having health complications after receiving the vaccine, which is just good, positive news for the vaccine.
Great. Okay. Well, let's look at some public conversation then. We're going to jump on Reddit to have a look at that.
Absolutely.
And YouTube, of course.
Yes, Reddit and YouTube. So the Reddit, there's almost always a political angle with things on Reddit with this type of thing. And as we can see here, the public conversation is very much about the Biden administration approaching the COVID vaccine distribution from scratch, essentially, is what the claim was in the reporting and the discussions around, having zero plans, allegedly, that the Trump administration had zero plans for the Biden admin to build on. People were excited about Biden being sworn in because they then felt that the vaccine distribution would get better. And then again, public consumption of the vaccine, that's a very big focus of conversations among the public, obviously. So the football stadiums being offered as COVID vaccination sites, people are, I think, generally pretty excited to get the vaccine. So the more news about higher levels of distribution, higher levels of availability, new sites where they can get it, that's generally been quite an excited thing for people to discuss on platforms where discussion is heavy, like Reddit.
Right. Actually, and Ben, I think we should so we have time to get to GameStop, because everyone must be excited about that as well. Maybe we should call it here, unless there's any questions. And if you do have any questions about the vaccine content getting engagement, drop them in the chat, and we will save a few minutes at the end for those. But maybe we jump over. Tell me about this. So for audience, Ben and I are not at all qualified to talk about the Super Bowl in any way. Thankfully, there's ads at the Super Bowl, and the ads are a big deal. And who doesn't love ads?
Well, indeed.
So Let's talk about what happened there. This is a
Exactly.
very interesting chart. What are we looking at here?
So this is a look at the engagement to Super Bowl ads in the past 4 years. So it looks at a comparison of reporting about the ads in 2021, 2020, 2019, and 2018. And you can see here we have the pink red line is this year's ads, and you can see it's a very different shape to how it normally is. And the reason we have this double spike is because actually this year, a lot of brands, not a lot of brands, but a few notable brands decided that they weren't actually going to do a Super Bowl ad. So we saw that with Budweiser, we saw it with Coca-Cola, and we saw it with Pepsi. And those announcements that they weren't going to run a Super Bowl ad actually received as much public attention as reporting about the ads themselves did on the day of the game, the weekend of the game.
Okay.
And what we normally see is just a huge spike on the day of the game, on the weekend of the game. And those have been much bigger in previous years. So 2019 and 2020 had much bigger spikes on the day of or the weekend of than they did this year.
And is that first pink spike then is entirely, and these are big numbers, right? That we're looking, those are millions on the right side here. So you're looking at getting like up to kind of 2 million, maybe net engagements just around the Budweiser announcement for the most part.
So I'll jump into Budweiser really quickly. Like this is a comparison of looking at Budweiser Super Bowl ads over the past 4 years. And you can see, it's not even close that this announcement this year, it's blue this time, actually got way more engagement than any of their actual ads ever did in the past. So I just thought that was an interesting piece of information that in terms of actually bringing attention, not only to themselves, but to the cause that they were promoting. They diverted the money that they would have spent on a Super Bowl ad to vaccine education. And we actually saw it as the top YouTube post from Budweiser in the vaccine panel that we looked at. Vaccine education is where they're spending their millions of dollars that they're not spending on advertising. So they brought attention not only to themselves by not running the Super Bowl ad, and it was mostly positive coverage, which is great for them, but also to the vaccine awareness cause, which is brilliant.
Amazing. That's such a, you need a logarithmic curve or something, right? Because you just squashed all previous years with what they did this year. It's remarkable.
Yeah, exactly. And you can see, 1.4 million interactions to Budweiser canceling their Super Bowl ad, whereas the most, 377,000 was the best year an actual ad had. So it's kind of 3, 4, 5 times that, which is fascinating. Yeah. And then I just wanted to quickly, I know we want to get to GameStop, but I just wanted to quickly look, if that's okay, at a similar thing. This is just focusing on the 2021 ads. So you can see the early spike here where people said they weren't going to run ads, and then the subsequent build up to the game day itself. Public interest actually, interestingly, precedes media interest here. The public were more interested in stuff being cancelled than the media were, and then the media were more interested in the ads around the games themselves. I think that's probably a fairly predictable thing. People are always writing about the Super Bowl ads. Not every publication is going to write about a brand's decision to cancel. But I just wanted to highlight the peaks and troughs that we normally see, which contrasts with what we were talking about, the vaccine stuff, and then just have a look at what some of the top stories were. So you can see the Budweiser decision to sit out the Super Bowl and funnel marketing dollars to boost vaccine awareness. That's the top article, 350,000 engagements. But then what does it mean to have a viral Super Bowl ad? And it's one thing for it to be watched on YouTube and shared on Facebook and etc. But once it's out there, it's kind of out of your control. And I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes thinking about that. So Toyota, for example, had the most engaged story about an ad that actually ran. But the ad was about an adoption and someone overcoming adversity and eventually competing at an Olympic, Paralympic level, a swimmer who was adopted. And then that gets taken and spun in a way that you quickly lose control over potentially. So the top article about that ad came from the Daily Wire and attached a strong pro-life message to that ad, which that definitely was not an explicit part of the ad. I suppose it could be read that way, but all of a sudden you're a brand that's taken a stance, whether that was the intention or not. You're having a stance put on your company. So that's potentially a difficult thing to deal with from a communication standpoint. So I just thought that was interesting. And then again, Jeep, there's been a lot going on with the Jeep ad and Bruce Springsteen. I'm sure people have seen there's been the DWI stuff, or everything around that. But even before that, the Jeep ad was getting a lot of attention in a partisan way, because that one was a more political ad that was saying, hey, we need to come together, we need to return to the center. But then it got criticized by mostly conservative sites saying, well, where were you saying this when Trump was president? It's all well and good saying it now Biden's president, but you were vocally critical of Trump, Bruce Springsteen. Why is this happening now? We could have all come together 2 years ago, according to the publications that think in that way. So it was by far the most written about ad, but that's not always a good thing, right? You have to look at what those articles that got high engagement were, and whether the conversation that was being driven around it was a good thing or not. And it's all well and good thinking, oh, we got reach in all these publications, but what were people actually saying? What were people engaging with? Which publications were they? And you see like the Daily Wire, Fox News, it's a very different, more conservative set of publishers looking at the top publishers there.
I think what's intriguing for me there is it comes back to something Richard Edelman said at Provoke a couple of years ago, which is, the new ecosystem's getting so complicated. The ad guys who build a really powerful but simple narrative, and then curtain closes, the curtain doesn't close anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You need people who specialize in the complex, because the story is always evolving and it keeps going after the 30-second ad is run. The other interesting thing is here, the stories or the ads that get the most engagement in the wider world of media is quite different to what I might see on Ad Age, where people are writing about like Oatly, or Reddit had a moment and things like that. It's interesting that like things, when it gets more mass engagement, you see some other things cropping up as well.
Yeah, exactly. And the Reddit ad did do well, especially on Reddit itself. There was the Wall Street Bets shared the Super Bowl commercial, which I thought was interesting.
Brilliant.
There's
our segue.
Yeah, there you go. So this is GameStop, and I think if we were looking for an example of the need to understand all the different aspects of social media, I don't think there's and media interaction and public engagement and interest, I don't think there's a better example than this. I did just want to quickly show a nice little graph that we put together of the public engagement with GameStop as compared to the stock price of GameStop, and you can see those mirror each other quite nicely. I think that's a very cool little comparison graph there. What's interesting is you can see GameStop start to rise in the stock price before it breaks into the mainstream in public engagement almost. And that's where this bit here is where the conversation on Reddit is happening, right? So that's before it takes off into the mainstream. So people that don't know, obviously, Wall Street Bets essentially declared war on GameStop, and again, well, not on GameStop, against hedge funds that were shorting GameStop and tried to make the stock price run up. And this all happened on Reddit before eventually breaking into the mainstream, and that's where you can see this huge spike in interest. 3-4 million engagements a day. And then that quickly fades away once the stock price starts falling back to lower levels. But yeah, this is just one of those examples that we really have to look at it from every angle and see, where are people engaging? How did this get into the mainstream? How much conversation happened on Reddit before it went into the mainstream? These are all questions that are difficult to answer, but we can answer them by looking at some of these viral posts in Wall Street Bets and seeing where that originated.
Mm-hmm. And again, the business press that's the most influential when we get into the wider media sphere, like outside of traders, it's Business Insider, CNBC is there, Forbes and the New York Post producing the most engaged content about the whole phenomenon.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's interesting. I mean, we had a conversation offline about this billboard and this top New York Post story, and it's just, things happen online that do have real world impacts. And like suddenly there's a billboard in Times Square. I'll click into it there for you. So yeah, defiant
Okay.
Redditors banding together to buy a Times Square billboard that basically was a meme. I mean, you saw it. It's GameStop Go Burr, which is a reference to the money printer Go Burr meme that people may or may not be aware of, which is a fun one.
Yeah. So to summarize, an online community bands together to buy a billboard, to post a meme, being reported by the New York Post, and then getting shared and engaged with 400,000 times on Facebook, becoming a really significant news story in itself. So we've got this, it's like the story's jumping out of the screen back into the screen,
It is, yeah.
and morphing. And that's before we even get down to the, AOC Ted Cruz, jousting about this as well that happened. And of course, you've got, it's amazing. There's often any story gets big enough, just like we've got, teams delivering vaccines to outposts in Alaska getting big shares. We've got a college student using his GameStop stock earnings to buy video games for a children's hospital,
Exactly.
earning a lot of Reddit karma doing so, as another, inspiring story. So, when a story gets big enough, it seems to quickly spawn a political dimension, inspiring dimensions. It becomes this microcosm.
Yeah, exactly. And that was the top story on Reddit as well. Using his GME tendies, for want of a better word, to buy Nintendo Switches from GameStop itself and then donated to a children's hospital. So it's this spiraling interdependent story. And you were talking about that. Imagine explaining to someone from 5 years ago how the story evolved and how GameStop ended up on a Times Square billboard. I just think the communications landscape has changed so much that it's just impossible to understand it without understanding all the interlocking pieces, I think.
Yeah, it sure is. It sure is. Do we have Danielle, is there any questions, or if anyone was intrigued by what we saw there, on GameStop, please drop a question in. We got one earlier direct in, which is, what kind of data requests are you typically getting from journalists, then when those come in?
Good question. I think it's mostly about how big an attention grabbing event things are. I think often journalists are on Twitter a lot, and I think views are people, not just journalists, but people's views are often warped by what's trending on Twitter. That's not what is trending on the web necessarily. Like, that's not what people are sharing on Facebook. It's not what people are talking about on Instagram. There's a big disconnect a lot of the time. So knowing what's trending on Twitter is great, but it's really putting that into the context of the wider web, and finding out how big a story this particular thing is overall in the whole ecosystem. That tends to be the context that we are giving journalists when they ask us questions like this.
Yeah. Look, it's some really interesting things being uncovered there. And of course, if anyone tunes in, if you have any follow-up questions, if you're a NewsWhip user, ping your CSM. We can connect you with Ben or give you guidance if you want to recreate any of the searches here or delve into any of these things, because there's worlds within worlds once you start interacting with the data there. But I think for once we might be in a position to finish on time here, Ben. So before we let everyone go, we've got a really exciting guest to announce in 2 weeks' time. It's Tonia Ries, who's the executive director of IP at Edelman, and she's one of the stewards of the Trust Barometer. So she'll be joining me to discuss the key findings in this year's report, which included further decline in trust in media and institutions, and some really interesting phenomena that certainly really struck me. And we want to dive into both the methodology and say, are things really as bad as this suggests it is, or and try and unpick some of the subtleties in there. But I think it's really important for anyone who's doing earned today, and who's doing own today, and who's responsible for reputation today. So please join us in 2 weeks for that, and join me in thanking Ben for all of your awesome insights this week.
Of course. Thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me. Thanks for listening in, everyone. It's great to be here again.
Brilliant. Thanks, Danielle. See you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.